All right, everybody. So I promised towards the beginning of the year that we would break with some of the typical content. We would expand it. We would start to have conversations not only with other content creators, but also professional political strategists. And I happen to bag one here. I've got Doug Wilson, founder of Alexander Wilson Consulting, a
Mhm,
man on a mission to change North Carolina or emphasize the changes that have been
mhm,
made to North Carolina. How you doing,
mhm.
Doug?
I'm doing good today, Josiah. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you.
Mhm.
Listen,
Yeah.
I don't want to put words in your mouth. You have a
Mhm,
very complex mission ahead of you in a state which I think is
mhm,
very misunderstood in terms of its
mhm,
political leanings from the outside.
mhm,
So, can you
mhm.
give an overview of who you are and what your mission is with respect to North Carolina?
Sure. Well, like you mentioned, my name is Douglas Wilson. I go by Doug for short. I've been in North Carolina now for about, I would say, 20 plus years. I'm originally from New York, from Jamaica, Queens. Was born there, raised there. My parents decided to move to South Carolina when I was in high school, and I finished up, I went to high school in South Carolina and then graduated there and went to University of South Carolina, and then I got involved in politics and moved to Charlotte in 2001. Just kind of giving you a
Mhm.
quick overview. But I got involved in politics first, working for Barack Obama's first campaign, which really taught me a lot about politics and a lot about connecting with voters and how to build those relationships that is needed, not just to win elections, but also to outlast the campaign that will last for decades. So I worked for Barack Obama on his first campaign, worked for the state party here as their deputy executive director, worked for Kay Hagan as their political director. And in 2020, I was one of the senior advisors to the Biden Harris campaign here in North Carolina. And I also, last campaign I did was I was a senior advisor to Congressman Jeff Jackson's campaign for Congress. And so my mission is to try to one make sure that North Carolina becomes a battleground state, really live up to that, and two, to make sure that we're able to deliver the state to Democrats. I am a Democrat, so I want to speak from the Democratic perspective here. And we just want North Carolina to live up to its history of being more of a progressive state in the South. And what I mean by progressive, I don't mean that this we're trying to push the state far left. We're trying to actually have the state live up to its creed and its motto. That 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 education should be something that we invest in more here, and that our jobs should be more plentiful here. And we've had a lot of jobs coming in, but the mission that's pretty much the mission here is to flip this state and to help the state live up to its aims.
Well, that's great. And there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, because
Mhm,
so full disclosure to the audience, which I've mentioned this in previous videos, even though the channel is not about my personal history. I moved to Charlotte, North Carolina in July 2022. I love this state. It's a beautiful state. Charlotte is, in my opinion, the best city I've ever lived in, the best city I've ever seen. It's beautiful, it's stunning, it's constantly
mhm,
growing. So I'm
mhm,
excited to see North Carolina also become more progressive and in terms of political affiliation, swing
mhm,
more towards the Democrats, or at the
mhm,
very least, rebalance to reflect the
mhm,
state's composition. Because, you said that the goal is to make North Carolina a battleground state, or to at least to live up to the status of a battleground state. And what's interesting is it's kind of a quasi battleground state
It is.
already in some
It is.
respects and not in others. My
Yeah.
understanding is that so President Obama won North Carolina. We're
Mm.
talking about macro politics for the
Mhm,
audience. We'll get into some of the state particulars, but
mhm.
in terms of electors, President Obama won in 2008. So it's not like a
He did.
Democrat has never won here,
Mhm,
but it tends to swing more for the Republicans. So
mhm,
set, I guess, local politics and state politics aside, looking at the national level, given that I think in 2020 it was relatively close between
it
Joe
was.
Biden and then
It
President
was.
Trump. What do
Mhm.
you think? Is there serious potential? Is it possible that if not in this election cycle, perhaps in the next one, we could see the electors go back to a Democratic candidate?
It is very possible because what's happening in North Carolina is, like you mentioned, and you're a good example of this. We're having a population boom in the state right now. We have, if you look in Charlotte, like I live here in Charlotte, every day I'm seeing a New York license plate driving around. I'm seeing a Massachusetts license plates. I'm seeing Ohio license plates. So we have folks moving from the Midwest, from up north down here. I have friends and family in Charlotte. I mean in New York that says, "Oh yeah, I've heard of Charlotte. I know friends that are moving down there." So the population growth in Charlotte, in the Triangle, in Greensboro, and a lot of our cities is booming. And the more and more that growth happens, the more those individuals are going to start to not just live in Raleigh proper or in Charlotte proper, but start living in those counties surrounding those those areas. And so I believe that the way that Democrats can be successful here this year is they have to do two things. One, and it sounds very generic and very simple, but it's really not. They will have to drive up turnout in Charlotte, in Wake, in Greensboro, in particular in Charlotte, to I would say maybe 300,000 votes. Because right now, Democratic candidates that run statewide are averaging about 65 to 67% of the vote. And to your listeners and viewers, they would think, well, that's a pretty good number. And it is. But when you have a population here that's close to 1 million people, that 67% is netting you about 235,000 votes. So the Democrats are still winning Mecklenburg, but the amount of voters that are voting in Mecklenburg for Democrats is not enough to offset the huge losses Democrats get in rural North Carolina, which goes to my next point is that the Biden campaign and the Stein campaign will have to go to rural North Carolina, go to some of those counties, knowing that they're not going to win, knowing that people are going to be like, "Why are you here?" But if they can increase Democratic performance index in those areas, basically what that means is how well a Democrat does in a given election in a county from 35%, which is about the average amount of votes Democrats get out of rural counties, to say 37, 38, you're still losing it, but you're adding to your vote total. We saw this in Georgia. The reason why John Ossoff was able to win his race, the reason why that Raphael Warnock was able to win his race is because they outperformed in Atlanta and cut their losses in North Georgia, South. I mean, talking about some hardcore MAGA areas. They still lost them, but they increased their vote margin maybe by 2 or 3%, and they end up winning those seats. So that's the formula here. It sounds simple, but it's extremely hard to do.
Well, to your point, I mean, I remember
Yeah.
at the time.
Mm,
So you have Senator Ossoff win, Senator Warnock wins, then he's
mm,
subject to an election. The next election cycle, he wins
mm.
it again. You know,
Yeah.
Georgia, for conventional like wisdom, people say, "Ah, what are Democrats even doing campaigning in Georgia?" There's
Mhm.
no way because it had two incumbent Republican
Mhm.
senators.
Yeah.
And to
Yeah.
your point, we flipped it. And North Carolina currently has
Mhm.
two incumbent Republicans as well, Tom Tillis
Mhm.
and Tim
Mhm.
Budd. Right? Ted Budd, Ted Budd, yeah, yeah.
Ted
Um,
Bud, yeah.
so again, so some of the
Mm,
parallels that you're drawing there are pretty interesting. I think pretty resonant.
mm.
I should also say that again for viewers that when Doug mentions Stein, he is not referring to Jill Stein. He is referring to
To
incumbent
uh,
Attorney
yeah,
General Josh Stein,
Josh
who is
Wan, yes,
running for governor here.
correct, correct.
Um, so listen, I can't imagine like the
Mm,
optimism that you probably
mhm,
feel given that when you came
mhm,
down here, like the first major stake was President Obama's victory. Again, that was a
mhm,
game changer. Before again we get into
mhm,
deeper state
mhm,
politics, has it been demoralizing or frustrating to see that momentum shift? You know, President Obama wins in
mhm,
2008, but the
mhm,
electors in 2012,
mhm.
2016, and 2020 all go to the Republican. Do you see it as a momentum shift? Did we, as Democrats, fail to do something? What
It's a
was the
lot.
situation there?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. So, just just for transparency, when I worked in Obama's campaign in '08, I was a regional field director, which now they call a a regional organizing director. That's the new term now. And my territory was Rock Hill, which for your viewers who don't know, Rock Hill is in South Carolina. Charlotte sits on the border of North and South Carolina. So we had Rock Hill, Chester County, and Lancaster County. These are all in the South Carolina. Not talking about Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And my job was to deliver those counties to Barack Obama in the primary in '07 and '08, and we were able to do that. Of course, you know how that would happen. So it has been frustrating because after the election, I think one of the mistakes that Obama did was he did not invest in the DNC. Like he took his campaign operations, which was probably the most successful Democratic campaign in American history, took that and made it run as a standalone operation that was focused on pushing his agenda, which weakened the DNC, which I believe led to the Republican takeover of 2010. Now, people don't really talk about the 2010 election. In my opinion, the 2010 election was the most consequential election in the last 20, 22 years, because that election shaped our politics to what we see today. That election gave us gerrymandering to a point where people that look like me, our votes are very much diluted. It also led to this extreme conservative agenda that our country hasn't seen before. And I know a lot of Republicans will get upset with me about that by saying that, but it's the truth. The Republicans that I remember growing up in the '80s and '90s would never push for a lot of the agenda items that this particular version of the party has right now. And thirdly, it led to the rise of Donald Trump. Donald Trump was able to, and Trump is someone that I don't know personally, of course, but growing up in New York, everybody knew about Trump. Trump was just like a regular guy. I apologize that he comes from my borough. He came from Jamaica, Queens, the same place that I was living.
I'm gonna
Um,
try not to blame you for him, okay? I'll try not to. Yeah, yeah.
but um, that election led to him, becoming the leader of the Republican Party and eventually becoming president. And so it has been demoralizing. It has been frustrating to now see that the country kind of it kind of went through a backlash of electing the first Black president with the hopes of us finally breaking away from the sins of our past, of Jim Crow, of slavery, of everything that went with that, to then electing a guy that was just the total opposite of what we elected, 8 years prior. And it and to see um, policies that were designed to help people trying to get rolled back, banning of books, banning of DEI training, and trying to erase the fact that we are a diverse country. Very frustrating, very demoralizing, and I am worried about, if Trump is reelected, what does that mean for the country? And also in the same breath, if Biden wins reelection, will there be another January 6th? So a lot of that is frustrating and demoralizing for me.
Yeah, I can't
Mm,
imagine, so full disclosure again, before I moved to
mm,
North Carolina, I lived spent most of my life in rural Kentucky,
mm,
then in Louisville, Kentucky. So when you're talking about seeing license plates from all over, I guarantee
mm,
you at some point, I'm not saying who, you may see an expired
mm.
Kentucky license plate drive through. I'm not saying who it is. But it's Charlotte in particular, but North Carolina in general, like you said, seeing a population growth, it is, as I mentioned, a quasi battleground state, because even though certain things trend towards Republicans, if you
Mhm,
look poll after poll after poll, Pew data,
Mhm.
there tend to be more registered Democrats and more people who affiliate with the Democratic Party. It's like
Mhm. Mhm.
43 to 41% to the
Yeah.
Republican Party. And you mentioned gerrymandering and that. So my
Mhm.
last question about state politics before we
Mhm.
get
Mhm.
into start to transition to the more local level.
Mhm.
You mentioned how President Obama made a mistake with respect to his reelection campaign and setting the stage
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
for future Democratic performance with his operations. Now,
Mhm.
President Biden made it a mission, or at least public statements, that he was going to emphasize North Carolina's role within the
Mhm.
Democratic Party. Were you pleased about that? Do you think he has followed through on that? What does that look like? Do you mind talking about that a
Mhm.
little bit?
No, I don't mind. Yes, I am pleased that he has done that because in 2020, the Biden campaign did not fully start operating in the state until July of that year. And we believe, us who were on that campaign, believe if we had started maybe April or March of 2020, that we could have flipped the state because it clearly showed that North Carolina was the only state that Trump lost by the smallest margin. And so I think Biden then now coming back and hiring some top notch political operatives to who were on the campaign last time, who understand the state, and hired them in January of this year shows that he's very focused on flipping the state. And also, what Biden has done that I think doesn't get a lot of credit for, he invested in the DNC. He really did. He worked with them. He made sure that some of his campaign apparatus went over there. And look what it resulted in. It resulted in Democrats not getting blown out in 2022, which was Biden's first midterm as president. You look at Barack Obama's first midterm as president, he loses 60, 66 seats. So you can see why, although a lot of people talk trash about the state party or the national party, you still need a strong state Democratic Party and a strong DNC to help down ballot candidates. And that's why investing in the party is so important. But to go back to your original question, is yeah, I am satisfied and glad that the president invested in here early. Now the task comes of delivering on that goal of making sure that North Carolina is in the Democratic column in November.